Right. So at this point, the project has evolved into a successful community. You've built a platform that is thriving with a vibrant ecosystem. As part of the company, when you're building new features and new technology, how do you think about what goes into the open source repository and what is part of what you believe is the company's resource or asset?
It's I think this is a place where you have to have a theory and you have to test it. Uh, the There's a couple of rules of thumbs here, and like I hesitate to even say these things because for every rule there's a counterexample of it. But a couple of things that I think about when I look at this. Number one is that developers don't pay for stuff. Once you start getting into, more operational roles, and I think that's what I would view paying for cloud services start to be, then I think those rules start to change. So it really depends on your definition of developer. But the reality is that a typical developer sitting in an enterprise, they would rather spend their weekends writing code than figure out the purchase order process of their enterprise. And companies make this hard on purpose to spend money for a lot of their developers. And so oftentimes what you find is that this distorts things where the people who do spend money in enterprises, the people who are your buyers, are often not your users. And so when you think about that user versus buyer dichotomy, it really comes down to what are the features that are critical for users? Put those into the open source. What are the features that are critical for buyers? Those are the things that you want to actually make sure that you reserve and that you think about building a business around. And this is not like, and this is where like it gets more subtle here because these groups don't operate independently, right? If you get a lot of traction with a set of users, and now the buyer, whether this be the head of IT or some, business unit GM or what have you, those folks have the engineers that they trust, and they're going to go to them for spot checks in terms of whether the technology that they're looking at buying is viable and healthy or not, right? And so now what you want to do is you want to like go in there, establish a relationship, establish a brand, establish that ownership and that emotional attachment, and then be able to say like, okay, we can both maintain that experience that the users love and then also go through and provide the set of features that are absolutely critical to the buyers on top of that. And it becomes a reinforcing action from both sort of bottoms up and top down when you think about your sales motion.
And there are parts or features that are clearly buyer side, there are features that are clearly user side, and then there are some in the middle. For example, you can think of authentication, SSO. And maybe SSO falls more on the buyer side, but authentication almost is a core feature of your application. If you're not authenticating, you're lacking core security features. How do you think about that element? I mean, is there a gray area in between, and how would you disambiguate that?
Yeah, there is a gray area in between. And honestly, I'm conflicted about this because I think, it's not unusual. And I think I saw a joke on Twitter earlier this week where it's like, SaaS, it's like, you have the free version, you have the solo version that's like $50 a year. And then you have the enterprise version that has SSO and it's like call us. And call us means that it's significantly more expensive. And that's the common pattern that we see because some of these features, whether we're talking, layering features on top of open source or whether we're talking about sort of like coming up with the additions breakdown strategy for SaaS, some of these features have outsized utility for the people that have money, right? So the idea is that like, what are the critical features for the folks that have money who can pay you for it? Those are the features that you want to charge a lot for. And I think as a developer and as an engineer, it's somewhat offensive where the value of a feature is not always proportional to the complexity of the implementation of that feature. And so breaking that assumption, like I'm convinced that you can make millions of dollars with the right bash script, right? Like it doesn't, it's not about like, it's not always about coming up with groundbreaking new hard technology. It's really about solving the right problem in the right way for the right person. And if you can do that, then you can start to do the segmenting and actually come up with the right features to actually have for your enterprise edition and all that. And I think, also as an engineer, we find this somewhat offensive. You're charging how much for what, right? And I think, but it costs a lot of money to run a company. It costs a lot of money to be able to actually create and support some of these projects. And I think that, part of building a business is recognizing that you're going to be giving up some value. You're not going to be capturing all the value that you create, but in doing so, you're making a deal where you can capture more reliably a smaller part of a larger market versus the entirety of a smaller market. And that's some of the trade-offs that I think you make as you think about whether you're doing a free edition for SaaS, or you think about whether you're going to start getting involved in open source and put real money, real time, real effort, real engineering behind that.